Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku could only use his power when he's forgotten by everyone. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the 1A classroom hummed with a specific kind of energy, a post-festival buzz that had yet to fade. It was a cocktail of newfound confidence, burgeoning rivalries, and the shared, unspoken trauma of a villain attack that had bound them together tighter than any school-sanctioned team-building exercise ever could. For Izuku Midoriya, the air tasted like progress. It tasted like hope. He sat at his desk, his scarred right hand flexing and unflexing under the table. The pain from the sports festival fight with Todoroki had long since receded into a dull, phantom ache, a permanent reminder of the price of power. But now, it was also a reminder of potential. Thanks to his brief, brutal internship with Gran Torino, that overwhelming, self-destructive power was finally starting to feel less like a borrowed cataclysm and more like an extension of himself. Full Cowling. The name itself felt electric on his tongue. The ability to let one for all flow through his entire body at a low, sustainable output, rather than concentrating it into a single, bone-shattering strike. It was the key. It was the first step on the path to truly making this incredible, terrifying quirk his own. "You seem lost in thought, Midoriya-kun," a crisp, authoritative voice noted from his right. Tenya Ida chopped the air with a hand, his movements as precise as a metronome. "While mental preparation is a crucial component of heroics, you must not neglect your immediate surroundings. We are due to receive our instructions for today's practical training in T-2 minutes." Izuku jumped slightly, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. Sorry, Ida-kun. I was just thinking about the training." "Excellent. A proactive mindset," Ida declared, pushing his glasses up his nose. From his other side, Ochako Uraraka leaned over her desk, her brown eyes sparkling with warmth. "He's probably figuring out 100 different ways to win before we even know what the test is." "Right, Deku-kun?" The nickname, once a cruel taunt from Bakugo, now felt like a badge of honor when she said it. It grounded him. "I'm just excited to try a few new things," he admitted, his gaze flicking back to his hand. He'd spent every spare moment practicing, channeling that gentle 1% hum of power until it felt as natural as breathing. He could leap higher, run faster, and move with an agility that felt utterly alien to the clumsy, quirkless boy he'd been just a few months ago. "That's the spirit!" Uraraka cheered, pumping a fist. "After the festival, I feel like we can take on anything." Her optimism was infectious, a bright spot in the often intimidating pressure cooker of UA. Ida and Uraraka had formed a natural, easy friendship, a stable anchor in the whirlwind of his new life. Ida's rigid structure gave him direction, Uraraka's boundless positivity gave him courage, and he, in turn, offered them his analytical mind and unwavering determination. They were a team. The classroom door slid open with a weary groan, and Shota Aizawa shuffled in, cocooned in his yellow sleeping bag. He unzipped it just enough for his head to emerge, his tired, bloodshot eyes scanning the room. The ambient chatter died instantly. "Good. You're quiet. Saves me the effort of shouting," he began, his voice a dry monotone. "Today's training will take place at Ground Gamma. You all remember it, the industrial complex. The scenario is urban disaster and rescue." A murmur of excitement rippled through the class. It was a direct follow-up to the kind of work they'd seen during the Hosu incident, a real-world application of their skills. "The objective is simple," Aizawa continued, ignoring the students' enthusiasm. "There has been a simulated villain attack resulting in catastrophic structural damage to a factory district. Your job is to locate and rescue 20 civilian casualties, represented by advanced rescue dummies, within a 30-minute time limit. These dummies have weight, heat signatures, and biofeedback. Treat them like real people. Some will be trapped, some will be critically injured and require careful extraction." He paused, letting the information sink in. "To make things more interesting, we've added a complication. There will be obstacles. Automated defense systems from the factory will still be active, acting as hindrances. Think of them as environmental hazards, not villains to be fought. Your priority is rescue, not combat." Evasion and mitigation are key. Aizawa's gaze seemed to linger on Izuku for a fraction of a second. You will be working in your internship teams or similar groups of 3. Your teamwork and decision-making under pressure are what's being graded. Now get into your costumes and meet at the training ground. Don't waste my time. With that, he zipped his sleeping bag back up and tipped over, already asleep on the floor. The class erupted into motion, the air crackling with anticipation. Izuku felt a familiar thrill course through him. This was it. A chance to show All Might, to show Mr. Aizawa, to show himself, that he was more than just a human hand grenade. He was going to be a hero who saves. Ground Gamma was a sprawling labyrinth of pipes, smokestacks, and towering concrete buildings that clawed at the sky. The air was thick with the manufactured smell of rust and coolant. It was designed to be overwhelming, a concrete jungle where danger could lurk around any corner. Izuku stood with Ida and Uraraka, stretching his limbs. His hero costume felt more comfortable now, more like a second skin. Mei Hatsum had already made some minor repairs and reinforced the gloves after the sports festival. All right, team, Ida said, already in his leadership mode. Our synergy is our greatest asset. Uraraka-san, your quirk will be invaluable for lifting heavy debris. Midoriya-kun, your analytical skills will help us prioritize targets and navigate the area efficiently. I will use my speed for reconnaissance and rapid extraction of accessible victims. Sounds like a plan. Uraraka beamed, pressing her fingertips together. Let's do our best. Izuku nodded, his mind already racing, creating a mental map of the area based on the blueprints they'd been given. The highest concentration of casualties will likely be in the central processing plant, Building C7. It's the largest structure, but also the most unstable. We should start on the perimeter and work our way in, securing the easier targets first to build momentum. A sound, logical strategy. Ida approved with a decisive nod. The klaxon blared, signaling the start of the exercise. Begin! All Might's voice boomed from unseen speakers, filled with his signature bravado. Recipro burst. Ida's engines roared to life, and he shot off in a blue-streaked blur, kicking up dust. I will scout the western sector. Report back in 90 seconds. Right. Izuku called after him. He turned to Uraraka. Let's check the low-rise buildings over here. They look less damaged, good place for a quick start. He focused, letting that now familiar warmth spread through his limbs. A faint, emerald aura flickered around him, barely visible in the daylight. One for all, full cowling, at a measly 1%. It was just enough to give his movements a springy, effortless quality. He bounded from a discarded shipping container to a low roof, landing as softly as a cat. Uraraka followed, using her quirk to hop gracefully behind him. The feeling was intoxicating. He wasn't breaking. He wasn't in agony. He was in control. They worked like a well-oiled machine. Izuku would spot a dummy's heat signature through a broken window, Uraraka would float a fallen girder out of the way, and together they'd carefully extract the civilian and move it to a designated safe zone. They were fast, efficient, and their communication was seamless. When Ida returned with a report on 3 more accessible targets, they moved with renewed purpose. 15 minutes in, they had successfully rescued 9 dummies, placing them near the top of the class leaderboard, which was being displayed on holographic screens at the entrance. We're doing great! Uraraka cheered, wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek. At this rate, we'll clear the whole sector. Do not become complacent! Ida cautioned, though a hint of pride was evident in his voice. The most difficult challenges lie ahead in the central plant. As if on cue, a loud, grinding groan echoed from the heart of the complex. Building C7, a monolithic 10-story structure of concrete and steel, shuddered violently. A plume of dust erupted from its midsection. That's the planned disaster escalation Mr. Aizawa mentioned, Izuku murmured, his eyes narrowed in analysis. It's designed to test how we react to a sudden change in the environment. It appears the structural integrity of the main plant is now critically compromised. Ida observed, his tone serious. The risk has increased tenfold, but that's probably where the last few dummies are. Uraraka finished, her expression determined. The ones who need the most help. She was right. It was the classic hero's dilemma. Weigh the risk against the reward. your own safety against the lives of others. For them, it was a simulation. For a pro, it would be real. We have to go in, Izuku said, his voice firm. But we have to be smart. No rushing. We enter, we locate, we extract. Anything looks too unstable, we back out and report it. Agreed? Agreed! Uraraka and Ida chorused. They made their way to the base of Building C7. The entrance was a mangled maw of twisted steel and shattered concrete. Inside, emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The air was thick with dust, and the entire structure groaned around them like a dying beast. I'm picking up 2 heat signatures on the 4th floor, Izuku said, consulting a small thermal scanner attached to his glove. Directly above us. And 1 more on the 5th, but the stairwell is completely collapsed. I can float us up through the hole in the ceiling, Uraraka offered, pointing to a large chasm where a chunk of the 2nd floor used to be. Good idea, Ida agreed. Let's move quickly and quietly. Uraraka touched Izuku and Ida, then herself, and with a gentle push, they floated upwards through the debris-filled void. The damage was worse up close. Wires sparked from exposed conduits, and the rebar skeleton of the building was visible through massive cracks in the walls. They landed on the 4th floor, a vast, open space filled with silent, hulking machinery. The 2 dummies were easy to spot, pinned under a large, overturned conveyor belt assembly. This is too heavy for me to lift safely, even with my quirk, Uraraka said, her hands pressed against the cold metal. The weight limit on her zero gravity was substantial, but this looked to be several tons of solid steel. If I try, I might get sick and drop it. Ida knelt, examining the wreckage. The fulcrum point is unstable. Trying to brace it could cause the entire machine to shift and crush them further. This was it. A problem that couldn't be solved by speed or gravity alone. It needed power. Raw, focused power. Izuku took a deep breath, the air gritty in his lungs. All his training with Gran Torino, all the mental images of the microwave and the taiyaki, all of it coalesced into a single point of focus. Spread the energy. Don't concentrate it. Let it flow. I can do this, he said, his voice steady. He stepped forward, planting his feet firmly on the groaning floor. Ida-kun, get ready to pull them out the second I lift it. Uraraka-san, be prepared to make them weightless to speed up the extraction. They both looked at him, their expressions a mixture of concern and trust. He saw it in their eyes, the belief that he could do it. It was a potent fuel. He closed his eyes. One for all. He pushed past the 1% threshold, past the gentle hum. 2%. 3. 4. The power swelled inside him, a tide of energy that was exhilarating and terrifying. He felt the familiar green lightning begin to crackle, not just around him, but under his skin. 5%. It was a manageable burn, a warmth that settled deep in his muscles. Full cowling, 5%. He opened his eyes, the world seeming sharper, brighter. He wedged his hands beneath the edge of the conveyor belt, the metal groaning in protest. With a sharp ki, he straightened his legs and back, pouring the strength of one for all into the lift. The massive machine tilted upwards. It was heavy, so incredibly heavy, but his body was holding. No snapping bones, no searing, self-destructive agony. Just pure, controlled strength. Now! He grunted through clenched teeth. Ida was a flash of motion, diving into the gap Izuku had created. He grabbed the 2 dummies, and Uraraka, touching them in sequence, made them as light as balloons. Ida was out in seconds, dragging the rescued civilians to a safe distance. Clear! Ida shouted. Izuku let the machine slam back down with a deafening crash that shook the entire floor. He stumbled back, panting, the emerald aura of full cowling fading as he powered down. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, but it was a good kind of tired. The tired of a job well done. Deku-kun, that was incredible! Uraraka exclaimed, her face alight with awe. You lifted that whole thing! And you're not hurt! Your control has improved exponentially, Midoriya-kun! Ida added, his usual formality laced with genuine amazement. A perfect application of strength. Izuku couldn't help the wide, relieved grin that split his face. It worked, he breathed, looking at his hands. It actually worked. He felt a surge of pride so potent it almost made him dizzy. This was the hero he wanted to be. Strong, reliable, and able to save people without sacrificing himself in the process. But their celebration was cut short. A deep, tectonic groan reverberated from below them, far more violent than before. The floor beneath their feet pitched like the deck of a ship in a storm. A massive crack splintered across the concrete, racing towards them like a bolt of lightning. "The building's coming down!" Ida yelled, his voice tight with alarm. "This is no longer a simulation. The structural failure is real." He was right. This felt different. The groans of the building were no longer just background noise. They were its death throes. A section of the ceiling collapsed nearby, showering them with concrete dust and debris. "The last dummy!" Izuku shouted, his eyes darting upwards. "The 5th floor! There's no time, Midoriya-kun!" Ida argued, already pulling Uraraka towards the hole they'd come through. "We must evacuate! That is the logical decision." Logically, he was right. Their own safety was paramount. But Izuku's gaze was fixed on the floor above. A life, even a simulated one, was on the line. That was the whole point of the exercise. To save everyone, and in that moment, something shifted. It was more than just a training exercise in his head. It was a test he couldn't fail. He saw Eri's face, Koda's face, all the people he wanted to protect. He couldn't leave anyone behind. "You two go!" he yelled over the cacophony. "Get the others to safety. I'll get the last one and meet you outside." "Deku-kun, no! It's too dangerous!" Uraraka cried, her hand outstretched towards him. "That's an order from your team leader," Ida declared, making a snap decision. "He's right. We are more effective splitting our efforts. We will secure the extraction point. Be careful, Midoriya-kun." Ida grabbed Uraraka and, with a powerful leap, propelled them both towards the chasm, trusting Izuku to follow. Izuku watched them go, then turned his attention back to the task at hand. He powered full cowling back up to 5% and launched himself upwards, easily clearing the 20-foot gap to the 5th floor. He landed in a crouch as the building convulsed again. This floor was a maze of shattered catwalks and dangling pipes. He spotted the dummy almost immediately. It was on a precarious metal platform on the far side of the room, near the outer wall. But the direct path was gone, a gaping hole separating him from his target. And then he saw the true danger. A huge section of the ceiling, a solid slab of concrete and steel the size of a small bus, had broken free and was hanging by a few strained pieces of rebar directly above the platform. It was swaying ominously with each tremor, shedding a rain of dust and pebbles. It wouldn't hold for much longer. There was no time for a clever plan. No time for careful maneuvering. The moment he stepped onto that platform, his weight might be the last straw. The teachers were probably screaming at him over the comms to get out, but the roaring in his ears drowned them out. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his focus. He saw Uraraka and Ida again in his mind's eye, not outside and safe, but somehow back in the room, trapped under that falling slab. The image was irrational, impossible, but it was vivid. The fear of their harm was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. "I have to be faster. I have to be stronger." The thought was a desperate prayer. The 5% he had been so proud of moments ago now felt woefully inadequate. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't be fast enough to grab the dummy and get clear. He needed more. He reached deeper into the well of One for All, pushing past the comfortable limit. 6%. 7. The energy intensified, the green lightning around him growing brighter, more frantic. 8%. The power was a roaring inferno now, singing the edges of his control. It was a risk. A huge one. But the image of that falling slab, the thought of failing, it was a greater one. "I have to save them." The thought had become tangled. He wasn't just saving the dummy anymore. In his panicked mind, he was saving Ida and Uraraka from the phantom danger he'd imagined. He was saving everyone. He took a running start, his feet barely seeming to touch the trembling floor. He launched himself across the chasm. For a split second, he was airborne, a streaking emerald comet in the gloom. He landed on the platform, And just as he feared, his impact was the final straw. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, the rebar holding the ceiling slab snapped. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. The colossal block of concrete began its slow, inevitable descent. There was no time to grab the dummy and run. There was only one option. One impossible, reckless, heroic option. He planted his feet, looked up at the descending mass of death, and let one for all flood his entire being. He didn't have time to channel it into a single limb. He poured it into his stance, into his arms, into his very soul. Full cowling, St. Louis smash! He thrust both hands upwards, not as a punch, but as a powerful, explosive shove. He put 8% of one for all's boundless power into it. The air pressure in the room detonated. A shockwave of pure force erupted from his hands, a visible dome of green energy that met the falling slab head-on. The impact was cataclysmic. The slab didn't just stop, it disintegrated. It exploded upwards and outwards in a shower of pulverized concrete and shrapnel. The force of his own blast threw him backwards, but he twisted in midair, landing on the relatively stable ground he'd leaped from, the rescue dummy cradled protectively in one arm. The room was suddenly, eerily silent, save for the patter of falling dust. The immediate threat was gone. He had done it. He had faced an impossible situation and won. He was panting, his muscles screaming from the sudden, intense output, but he was whole. He was unbroken. He looked down at the dummy in his arms, then across the room to where the platform, now clear, still stood. A triumphant, breathless laugh escaped his lips. He couldn't wait to tell All Might. He turned, expecting to see Ida and Uraraka in the chasm below, their faces filled with worry and relief. And they were there. They had come back for him, their sense of loyalty overriding Ida's logical command to evacuate. They were staring up at him, their silhouettes framed by the flickering emergency lights. He grinned, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "It's okay. I'm okay. I got the last one," he shouted, his voice hoarse. He started walking towards the edge of the chasm, ready to jump down and rejoin them. But he stopped. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. It was their faces. They weren't filled with relief or awe. There was no worry, no camaraderie. Their expressions were utterly, chillingly blank. It was the polite, cautious look you give a complete stranger who is shouting at you in a collapsing building. Uraraka had a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with a detached sort of shock. Ida stood ramrod straight, his posture defensive, analytical. "Thanks." Uraraka's voice floated up to him, thin and unfamiliar. The warmth was gone, replaced by a formal politeness. "That was incredible. You cleared the danger." She tilted her head, a confused furrow in her brow. "Who are you? Are you with the support course?" "That was some impressive tech." Izuku's heart stopped. The words didn't compute. It was like his brain was trying to process a sentence in a language it had never heard. "Who are you?" He felt the blood drain from his face. A cold, creeping dread, far worse than the fear of the falling ceiling, began to snake its way up his spine. This had to be a joke. A really, really bad joke. What?" he stammered, his triumphant grin crumbling. "Uraraka-san?" "It's me." Ida took a half-step forward, shielding Uraraka slightly. His voice was cold and clipped, the voice of a hero addressing an unknown variable in a crisis zone. "Your quirk is powerful, and your intervention was undeniably effective," he stated, his eyes scanning Izuku from head to toe, assessing him. "We are in your debt. For our official report, may I ask your name and your class affiliation?" The world tilted on its axis. The roaring in Izuku's ears returned, but it wasn't the sound of destruction anymore. It was the sound of his reality shattering. "May I ask your name?" "Ida-kun." The name came out as a choked whisper. He felt dizzy, nauseous. His gaze darted between his two closest friends. He saw nothing in their eyes. No recognition. No shared memories of fighting villains at the USJ, of eating lunch together, of studying for exams. Nothing. He was looking at two people who had never seen him before in their lives. "It's me," he said, his voice cracking with a desperation he didn't understand. He took a clumsy step forward, his leg nearly giving out. "It's Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya." Class 1A, their confusion only deepened. Midoriya? Uraraka repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it for the first time. I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Ochako Uraraka. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya-san. The san was a hammer blow to his soul. The formal honorific, a polite barrier between strangers. She had never called him that. Not once. I am Tenya Ida, Ida added, still in his formal stance. The class representative of 1A. I apologize, but I do not recall a student by your name in our class. I do not recall a student by your name. The sentence echoed in the cavern of his skull. It was impossible. It was insane. Was this part of the test? A psychological warfare component? It had to be. It was the only explanation that didn't completely unravel the fabric of the universe. But the look in their eyes, it was too genuine. The blankness was too complete. There was no flicker of jest, no hint of a prank. There was only the placid, polite confusion of strangers. His control over One for All, already strained by the 8% output and the sheer psychological shock, finally snapped. The torrent of power he was holding in check wasn't a gentle stream he could turn off. It was a pressurized fire hose, and his grip had just failed. The green lightning sputtered. The thrumming energy that filled his body vanished in an instant, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The world, which had seemed so sharp and vivid, snapped back to its normal, duller resolution. He felt the power recede, vanishing back into the secret, locked part of himself where it lived. And in the chasm below him, Uraraka and Ida both gasped. They blinked, hard, a synchronized movement, as if waking from a deep and sudden trance. Their bodies, which had been tense and guarded, relaxed. The blankness in their eyes vanished, replaced by a flood of emotion so sudden it was like a dam breaking. Worry. Fear. And overwhelming, frantic relief. Deku Kun! Uraraka screamed, her voice raw with terror. Oh my gosh, get down from there! The whole building is unstable. That was way too reckless. Izuku froze, his mind whiplashing from one reality to the next. Ida's arm chopped the air, his face a mask of stern concern. Midoriya-kun! A spectacularly powerful, if outrageously dangerous, maneuver. You saved the casualty, but you must have more regard for your own safety. We were worried sick. The warmth was back. The familiarity. The shared history. Deku-kun. Midoriya-kun. The names were right. The tone was right. The look in their eyes was the look of friends who had watched him do something terrifying and were now bursting with a mixture of pride and fear. They had no memory of what had just happened. No memory of looking at him like a stranger. To them, the last 30 seconds had never occurred, but they had occurred for him. And the memory was now seared into his brain like a brand. A wave of vertigo so intense it nearly sent him to his knees washed over him. He stumbled back from the edge, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He leaned against a broken pillar, the rough concrete biting into his back. The rescue dummy clattered from his numb arms. I'm okay, he managed to say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. He needed an excuse. An explanation for his pale face and trembling hands. He forced a weak, shaky smile. Just a little tired. Using that much power still takes a lot out of me. It was the perfect lie. It was the truth they expected. The rumbling of the building seemed to be subsiding, the main structural collapse averted by his explosive intervention. In the distance, he could hear the approaching sounds of the other students and teachers. The exercise was over. He slid down the wall, his legs finally giving out, and sat heavily on the dusty floor. Uraraka and Ida were by his side in an instant, helping him up, their hands on his shoulders, steadying him. Their touch was warm, familiar, and it felt like a lie. You were so cool, Deku-kun, Uraraka was saying, her eyes still wide. But don't you ever scare me like that again. A textbook example of prioritizing rescue above all else, Ida praised. Though we must review the inherent risks at a later date. Their words, their praise, their friendship, it all washed over him, but it didn't touch him. He was encased in a bubble of cold, silent horror. He nodded and mumbled replies, playing the part of the exhausted but triumphant hero. He let them help him to his feet and guide him out of the ruined building, into the light where their classmates were gathering, their faces a mixture of awe and concern. He saw All Might giving him a thumbs up from the observation booth, a proud grin on his face. He saw Aizawa, looking as stern as ever, but with a flicker of something that might have been approval in his tired eyes. They were all looking at Izuku Midoriya, the heroic prodigy who was finally mastering his quirk. But Izuku was looking at his own hands, the conduits for that incredible, monstrous power. He replayed the scene in his head, over and over. The polite smiles. The vacant eyes. The chillingly formal questions. Who are you? May I ask your name? A glitch in the code of reality. A side effect so horrifying, so deeply personal, that no one would ever believe him. A power that, in the moment of its greatest triumph, had erased him from the minds of his dearest friends. He walked with them, surrounded by their warmth and their voices, but he had never, ever felt so completely and utterly alone. And a single, terrifying question began to bloom in the silence of his heart. What happens next time? The ride back from Ground Gamma was a cacophony of triumphant noise. Voices bounced off the metal walls of the bus, a vibrant tapestry of post-exercise analysis, friendly boasting, and shared relief. Kaminari was dramatically recounting how Shiro's Tate had saved him from a rogue cleaning drone, while Ashido and Hagakure offered a running, giggling commentary. Even Bakugo was participating in his own way, snarling at Kirishima that his own performance was, as always, leagues above everyone else's pathetic attempts. Izuku Midoriya sat by the window, a silent island in the sea of cheerful chaos. He stared out at the passing campus scenery, but he didn't see the manicured lawns or the familiar Yui buildings. He saw the blank, polite faces of his two closest friends. He heard their voices, stripped of all warmth and familiarity, asking him who he was. Midoriya-kun, are you all right? The voice was right next to him, crisp and concerned. Izuku flinched, his body tensing as if struck. He turned to see Tenya Ida looking at him, his brow furrowed with genuine worry. The same face that, less than an hour ago, had regarded him as a complete unknown. You have been remarkably quiet since we left the training ground. Ida continued, his hand hovering in the air, hesitating to make one of his usual chopping motions. While your final maneuver was the pinnacle of heroic instinct, the physical and mental toll must have been significant. You should be proud, not withdrawn. Izuku forced his lips into a shape that he hoped resembled a smile. It felt brittle, like a mask made of thin glass. Why yeah, I'm okay, Ida-kun. Just tired. Like I said. It was a lot of power. Across the aisle, Ochako Uraraka leaned forward, her expression mirroring Ida's concern. He's right, Deku-kun. You were amazing, but you look really pale. Are you sure you're not hurt? Maybe you should see Recovery Girl, just in case. Her voice was so full of earnest care it felt like a physical blow. This was the real Uraraka. The friend who had supported him from the very first day. The girl whose simple kindness had helped turn a schoolyard insult into a hero's name. The memory of her polite, distant expression. I don't think we've been introduced, Midoriya-san. Was a venomous counterpoint to the genuine warmth in her eyes now. He felt a desperate, primal urge to pull away. To put distance between himself and this kindness he felt he no longer deserved. This friendship that felt so fragile he was terrified he might break it just by existing too loudly. No, I'm fine, really, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned back to the window, a clear dismissal. Just need to rest. The lie was a bitter stone in his throat. He felt their shared gaze on him for a few more moments before they reluctantly turned back to each other, whispering in low, worried tones. He had pushed them away. The first of what felt like 1,000 necessary cruelties. The rest of the day passed in a blur of muted horror. In class, he couldn't focus on present mixed English lesson. Every time a classmate spoke to him, a jolt of ice-cold panic shot through his veins. He answered questions in clipped, short sentences. He avoided eye contact. When Uraraka offered to share her notes, he mumbled that he already had them and hunched lower over his desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a ghost at his own desk, haunted by a memory only he possessed. That night sleep offered no escape. He thrashed in his bed, caught in a nightmarish loop. He was in the crumbling factory, but it was his own home. He would use his power to save his mother from a falling bookshelf, and she would turn to him with a placid smile and ask if he was lost. He would see All Might on a rooftop, and his mentor would look down at him, skeletal and frail, and ask, "Can I help you, young man?" He saw Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Kirishima, all of them, their faces erased, their memories wiped clean by the very power he was supposed to use to protect them. He woke up before dawn, drenched in a cold sweat, his throat raw from a scream that had been trapped in his lungs. He couldn't go on like this. The not knowing was a poison, seeping into every corner of his mind. He was a scientist by nature. His notebooks were a testament to his obsessive need to analyze, to understand, to deconstruct. He couldn't let this thing remain an unknown variable. He had to quantify it. He had to test it. He had to form a hypothesis, no matter how terrible. He scrambled out of bed and went to his desk. He pushed aside his hero analysis notebooks. Hero analysis for the future, number 13 felt like a relic from another lifetime, and pulled out a fresh, blank one. He stared at the empty cover for a long moment, then picked up a pen. He didn't write a title. This wasn't for the future. This was for survival. He opened it to the first page. His handwriting, usually a frantic, excited scrawl, was tight and controlled, the letters small and precise as if he were afraid the words themselves might escape. Phenomenon: temporary acute dissociative amnesia in subjects proximal to OFA activation. He paused, the clinical terminology a thin shield against the sheer terror of the concept. Initial incident: ground gamma training exercise. Power output: approximate. 8% full cowling, St. Louis smash. Duration of power use: approximate. 3 to 5 seconds. Subjects T. Ida O. Uraraka. Observed effect: complete temporary loss of personal memory regarding I. Midoriya. Subjects conversed with me as if I were a complete stranger. They retained general knowledge, UA, hero work, but not personal recognition. Reversal: memory loss appeared to reverse instantly upon deactivation of OFA. Subjects displayed no awareness of the memory lapse, seamlessly resuming their prior emotional state, worry, relief. He stopped writing, his hand trembling so badly he could barely hold the pen. The facts, laid out so clinically, were damning. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a psychological prank. It was a direct, observable consequence of his quirk. His mind raced, desperately searching for loopholes, for alternative explanations. Could it have been a secondary quirk? From another student? Unlikely. No one else was nearby, and no known quirk had such a specific, targeted effect. Was it a malfunction in the training ground systems? A psychotropic gas? Possible, but why would it only affect their memory of him? And why would it reverse the exact moment he powered down? The correlation was too perfect. He leaned back, his head hitting the wall with a soft thud. The simplest explanation, the one that fit all the facts, was the most monstrous. My power erases me. The thought was so cold, so absolute, it seemed to freeze the air in his lungs. He felt a wave of nausea. This gift from All Might, the legacy of heroes, the symbol of hope, was a curse that fed on his connections to others. The stronger he became, the more he would have to use it. And the more he used it. He looked at the page again, his eyes drawn to one key variable. Power output, approximate, 8%. He remembered the first time, when he'd used 5% to lift the conveyor belt. There was no memory loss then. Ida and Uraraka had been fine, praising him without a hint of confusion. The trigger wasn't just using the quirk. It was using it at a certain level. Hypothesis: the memory erasure effect of one for all is directly proportional to the percentage of power output utilized. A threshold exists, somewhere between 5% and 8%, at which the phenomenon activates. A terrible, agonizing thought followed. If 8% for a few seconds caused a total, temporary wipe, what would a higher percentage do? What would a longer duration of use do? Would the memories stay gone for longer? Would they come back, damaged? Fragmented? Would the emotional connection be severed permanently? The question gnawed at him, a physical pain in his gut. He had to know. He couldn't live with this uncertainty hanging over his head. He needed to conduct another experiment. A controlled one. Low stakes, minimal variables, and he knew, with a sinking, heartbreaking certainty, who the test subject had to be. The weekend couldn't come soon enough. Every day at UA was a new form of torture. He trained relentlessly, but only on the things that didn't require his quirk. He ran until his lungs burned. He practiced the basic martial arts Aizawa had taught them until his muscles screamed. He filled his new, secret notebook with theories and equations, trying to map the parameters of his own curse. His friends noticed. Of course, they noticed. "Deku-kun, you're pushing yourself too hard," Uraraka said one afternoon, finding him alone in the gym, drenched in sweat and working a punching bag with quirkless, bruised knuckles. "You're not sleeping, are you? You have dark circles under your eyes." "I'm fine," he lied, not meeting her gaze. "Just motivated." "There is a fine line between motivation and self-destructive obsession, Midoriya-kun," Ida added, appearing at her side. "We are your friends. If something is troubling you, you can confide in us." The irony was a physical blow. The thing that was troubling him was the very real possibility that one day, they wouldn't be his friends, and they wouldn't even know what they had lost. He felt a lump form in his throat. "Thanks, guys," he mumbled, turning away to wrap up his hands. "But I'm okay. Just have a lot on my mind." He saw the hurt in their faces as he walked away, and it felt like twisting a knife in his own stomach. Even Bakugo seemed to sense the shift. His taunts became more pointed, more confused. "What's the matter, Deku?" He'd snarled during a combat drill. "Finally realized that fancy quirk of yours is just a cheap rental? You've been fighting like a quirkless nobody all week. Pathetic." Izuku just took the verbal assault, offering no defense. In a way, Bakugo was right. He was trying to be a quirkless nobody again, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. When he finally boarded the train home on Friday afternoon, a profound sense of both dread and relief washed over him. He was escaping the constant, watchful eyes of his friends, but he was walking toward the gallows he had built for himself. His mother, Inko, greeted him at the door with a hug that felt like sunlight after a week of storms. "Izuku! Oh, welcome home, baby! You look so tired. Are they working you too hard at that school? Come in, come in. I made katsudon." Her love was a pure, unconditional thing. It had been the one constant in his entire life. Through years of being quirkless, through bullies and despair, his mother's belief in him had never wavered. Her love was the foundation upon which his entire world was built, and he was about to take a sledgehammer to it. He ate dinner with her, forcing the delicious katsudon down a throat that felt tight with unshed tears. He answered her questions about school with vague platitudes. He laughed at her stories about the neighbors. He acted the part of the loving son, all the while feeling like a traitor. Every smile she gave him was a fresh wound. After dinner, the moment came. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she washed the dishes. Her back was to him. The house was quiet. The conditions were perfect. He stood in the doorway of the living room, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Just a little, he told himself, his internal voice shaking. Just a tiny flicker. The lowest possible output, below the threshold. It has to be below the threshold. He needed a baseline. He needed to prove to himself that low-level use was safe. That the 5% he used to lift the machine was not a fluke. He held up his right index finger. He closed his eyes and focused. He didn't reach for the roaring sea of full cowling. He reached for a single drop of water. He pictured the tiniest spark, a green firefly of energy. One for all stirred within him. He felt the familiar warmth, but he kept it contained, forcing it down his arm, into his hand, concentrating an infinitesimal amount into the tip of his finger. A faint, almost imperceptible green light glowed under his skin, and a few tiny sparks, no bigger than motes of dust, crackled around it. It was less than 1%. A mere fraction of a percent. The barest whisper of the quirk's power. The world didn't change. The air didn't crackle. But he felt it, a subtle, metaphysical shift. A wire being unplugged somewhere in the universe. He took a deep, shuddering breath and stepped into the kitchen. His footsteps were unnaturally loud in the sudden silence of his mind. "Mom?" he asked. His voice sounded alien. Inko turned from the sink, wiping her hands on her apron. A pleasant, gentle smile was on her face. It was her default expression for polite company. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice light and kind. "Can I help you, young man? Are you one of Izuku's friends from school?" He didn't mention anyone was coming over. The floor fell away. The walls dissolved. The universe collapsed into the single point of his mother's smiling, unknowing face. It had happened. Even at this minuscule level. It had happened. His breath hitched. His vision swam. He was a ghost in his own kitchen. A stranger to the woman who gave him life. The clinical detachment he tried to maintain in his notebook shattered into a million pieces of pure, unadulterated agony. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked, her head tilted with concern at his pale, stricken expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you feeling all right?" "I am the ghost." He wanted to scream. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He just stared at her, his heart breaking with every beat. He saw the genuine, human kindness in her eyes, the same kindness she would show to any stranger in need, and it was 1,000 times more painful than hatred ever could be. With a monumental effort of will, he forced himself to focus. "Deactivate," his mind screamed. "Let it go." He severed the connection. The tiny spark in his fingertip winked out of existence. The warmth vanished, replaced by a profound, soul-deep cold. The wire plugged back in. Inko Midoriya gasped, a sharp, sudden intake of breath. She swayed on her feet, clutching the edge of the sink for support. Her eyes, which had been placidly confused, widened in disorientation. She blinked rapidly, her gaze darting around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. Then, her eyes landed on him, and recognition flooded back in. "Izuku!" she cried, her voice trembling. She pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness, you startled me! I must have completely zoned out. My mind just went blank for a second." She shook her head, a faint, embarrassed laugh escaping her lips. "Oh dear. I must be more tired than I thought. I didn't even hear you come in." She had an explanation. A simple, mundane, logical explanation for a supernatural event. A moment of absent-mindedness. Zoning out. Her mind, like Uraraka's and Ida's, had seamlessly papered over the gap, leaving behind only a faint residue of confusion and disorientation. But Izuku knew the truth. He couldn't stay there. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear the weight of her innocent, unconditional love. I just remembered I left some notes at school," he stammered, the lie tasting like ash. "I have to go get them. It's for a big project." "Now?" "Izuku, it's late," she said, her concern for him immediately overriding her own strange moment. "I have to. It's important," he said, already backing out of the kitchen. He couldn't look at her face. "I'll be back soon. I promise." He didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed his keys and his secret notebook and fled. He ran from the house, from the warmth of the kitchen, from his mother's worried calls. He ran as if the hounds of hell were at his heels, but the monster he was running from was inside him. He didn't use his quirk. He ran on pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. His legs pumped, his lungs burned, and the cool night air was a shock to his system. He didn't know where he was going at first, only that he had to get away. But as his feet pounded the pavement, a destination began to form in his mind. There was only one person in the entire world he could talk to. One person who might understand. One person who was intrinsically linked to this curse. His anchor. He ran all the way to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It was deserted at this hour, the only sounds the rhythmic sigh of the waves and the distant hum of city traffic. The sand, once a mountain of trash and rusted appliances, was now clean and pristine, a monument to their shared journey. This was where it all began. The place where his dream had been given life. It felt like a fitting place to confess that it had become a nightmare. He saw him sitting on one of the seawall steps, a skeletal figure silhouetted against the moonlight on the water. Even from a distance, Izuku could feel the weight of his presence. All Might. Tashinori Yagi. He must have heard him coming. He turned his head, his cavernous eyes finding Izuku's form in the darkness. "Young Midoriya?" he called out, his voice thin but clear. "What are you doing out here so late? Is everything all right?" Izuku stumbled to a halt before him, panting, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. He couldn't form words. He just stood there, clutching the notebook to his chest like a shield. Toshinori's expression shifted from surprise to deep concern. He stood up, his tall, frail frame looking fragile in the moonlight. "My boy, you're shaking. What happened? Was there an attack?" Izuku finally found his voice. It was hoarse, broken. "Worse," he whispered. He sank to his knees in the sand, the notebook falling open at his side. He couldn't hold back the sob that tore its way out of his throat. It was the sound of pure, undiluted despair. Toshinori was at his side in an instant, a bony hand on his shoulder. The touch was grounding, real. "Izuku. Talk to me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Taking a ragged breath, Izuku began to speak. He didn't start with the emotions. He started with the data. He laid it all out, his voice gaining a frantic, analytical edge as he recited the contents of his secret notebook. He told him about the ground gamma exercise, about the 5% lift, and the 8% smash. He described, in painstaking detail, the looks on Uraraka's and Ida's faces, the exact words they used. "They didn't know me, All Might," he said, his voice cracking. "They looked right at me and they didn't know who I was." Toshinori listened, his expression growing more and more grim. He remained silent, letting Izuku pour out the entire, insane story. I thought maybe it was a fluke," Izuku continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A hallucination. Stress. So I had to test it." He gestured to the open notebook. "I wrote down a hypothesis, that the effect is tied to power output. That there's a threshold." "What did you do, my boy?" Toshinori asked, his voice low and heavy with dread. "I went home," Izuku choked out. "My mom, she was in the kitchen. I used my quirk. Just a tiny bit. The smallest amount I could manage. And He couldn't finish the sentence. He just looked at his mentor, his eyes pleading for understanding. Toshinori's face, already gaunt, seemed to hollow out even further. The implications crashed down on him, and the last vestiges of hope that this was some kind of misunderstanding evaporated. "She didn't recognize you," he stated. It wasn't a question. Izuku just shook his head, fresh tears tracing paths through the grime on his cheeks. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the waves. Toshinori stared out at the dark water, his mind, the mind of the former #1 hero, grappling with a problem that couldn't be punched. "One for all is not a normal quirk," he said finally, his voice raspy. "It is a coalescence of power, passed from user to user. It has a will, a history. Nana Shimura, my master, used to say it felt alive." He looked down at Izuku, his eyes filled with a terrible, dawning pity. "When I met you, you were quirkless. A vessel that had never before held a power of its own. Perhaps the quirk had to adapt to you in a way it never has for any previous user." A plume of steam suddenly erupted from his body, and with a pained grunt, he swelled into his muscle form. All Might stood there, his face, usually fixed in a permanent grin, now a mask of grim contemplation. The transformation wasn't for show. It was a reflex, a way of facing a threat. "This is just a theory, young Midoriya," All Might said, his voice booming but subdued. "But what if this glitch, is not a glitch at all? What if it's a defense mechanism?" Izuku looked up, confused. "A defense mechanism? How is erasing me from existence a defense? Think about it," All Might reasoned, pacing slowly on the sand. "One for All is the most coveted power on the planet. Its greatest enemy, All for One, built an empire hunting its wielders. Its greatest weakness has always been the user's loved ones. They are the targets, the leverage. All for One preyed on that." He stopped, turning to face Izuku. "You were a quirkless boy who shouted his dream of being a hero from the rooftops. You are good and kind, and you wear your heart on your sleeve. To a predator, that is a map of your weaknesses. What if One for All, and settling into a body with no natural defenses, created one of its own? A brutal, horrific, but ultimately effective one." He knelt, his massive form eclipsing the moon. What if the quirk's logic is this? If no one remembers you, no one can be used against you. When you are at your most powerful, when you are drawing on the quirk to face a great threat, you are simultaneously at your most vulnerable. So the quirk protects you. It isolates you. It turns you into a phantom, an unknown variable that the enemy cannot predict or leverage. It erases the hero's greatest weakness, his connections. The theory was insane. It was the stuff of nightmares. But it fit. It explained everything with a terrible, cosmic logic. The quirk wasn't a poisonous gift. It was a paranoid bodyguard, a sentient power that had decided the only way to keep its new, fragile host safe was to sever his attachments to the world. The stronger he became, the lonelier he would be. It wasn't a side effect. It was the entire point. So what do I do? Izuku whispered, the full weight of his new reality crashing down on him. I can't be a hero if it means my own mother won't know who I am. I can't save people if the price is my own life, my own memory. All Might placed a giant hand on Izuku's head, the touch surprisingly gentle. No, he said, his voice softening. You will not face this alone. I am the 8th user. The vestiges of the past users reside within this power, and a part of me resides there, too. When you used your power at the training ground, did you feel my memory of you fade? Izuku thought back. He had been so focused on Ida and Uraraka, he hadn't even considered it. I don't know. I felt something, All Might confessed. A brief confusion. A sense of displacement. But I never forgot you, my boy. Not for a second. My connection to One for All itself may act as an anchor against this effect. If that is true. He looked Izuku directly in the eye, his own shining with fierce, unwavering resolve. Then I will be your anchor. I will be the one who remembers. I will be your memory when the world forgets. The promise was so profound, so absolute, that it pierced through Izuku's despair. He wasn't entirely alone. He had one person. One anchor in the storm. We will figure this out, All Might declared, standing up again. We will test the parameters. We will find the limits. We will treat this not as a curse, but as a condition of your power, and we will learn to control it. You will still become a hero, young Midoriya, but your path will be harder and lonelier than I could have ever imagined. Izuku slowly got to his feet, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He felt drained, hollowed out, but the frantic, spiraling panic had subsided, replaced by a grim, cold determination. The hypothesis was formed. The truth, as terrible as it was known. He was Izuku Midoriya, wielder of One for All. And his power worked by making the world forget he ever existed. He picked up his notebook, the pages gritty with sand. His terrible hypothesis was no longer a theory. It was the first chapter in the story of his new life. A life where every act of heroism would be an act of self-erasure. The world had not ended. The sun had risen, casting its ordinary golden light over Muzurifu. Students still shuffled into the UA gates, their chatter filling the morning air with a mundane symphony of gossip and groans about homework. To any outside observer, it was just another Tuesday, but for Izuku Midoriya, the world had been fundamentally altered. It was as if he were viewing it all through a thick, soundproof pane of glass. He was present, but not truly participating. He was a spectator in his own life. The confession on Dagoba Beach had been a necessary catharsis, a lancing of a wound that had been festering in the dark. All Might's theory, as terrifying as it was, had provided a framework for his horror. It gave his curse a name, a purpose, however cruel. A defense mechanism. A paranoid, sentient power that had decided the only way to protect its wielder was to build a fortress of solitude around him. He and All Might had talked late into the night, sitting on the cold sea wall as the tide rolled in and out, a steady rhythm against their frantic, whispered plans. They had established a new set of commandments, a grim protocol for his continued existence as a hero in training. Rule number 1. One for All was no longer a tool. It was a panic button, a weapon of last resort, to be used only in the face of catastrophic, unavoidable disaster where lives were on the line and all other options had been exhausted. The casual, joyous experimentation with full cowling was over. Rule number 2. Izuku Midoriya had to become a hero without it. His primary weapons were now his mind, his body, and anything the Yui support course could build for him. His quirk was, for all intents and purposes, sealed away. He was, in practice, quirkless once more. Rule number 3. All Might was his anchor. His confessor. The sole keeper of the full, terrible truth. He was the one who would remember when no one else could. The weight of that responsibility was visible in the new, deep lines etched around Toshinori's eyes. Izuku walked through the halls of UA, the secret of physical weight in his gut. He carried a new notebook in his bag, separate from his hero analysis series. This one was plain black, with no title on the cover. Inside, on the first page, he had written a single, clinical title, Codex Anamnesis. It was his personal grimoire, a catalogue of his curse. It contained his initial hypothesis, the details of the ground gamma incident, and a heartbreakingly brief entry about the test on his mother, followed by pages of frantic, desperate calculations. He was trying to map the unmappable, to find the exact threshold where memory began to fray. Was it 6%? 7.5%? Did duration matter more than intensity? It was a problem he could analyze but never safely test. The invisible wall between him and his classmates felt a mile thick. Every good morning, Midoriya, was a reminder of what he stood to lose. Every friendly smile felt like a ticking time bomb. "You're still looking pretty rough, Deku-kun," Uraraka said, falling into step beside him as they approached the classroom. Her brow was wrinkled with the same open-hearted concern that now twisted like a knife in his chest. "Did you ever figure out what was wrong?" "Just tired," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor ahead. "Long weekend. A proper hero must maintain a regular sleep schedule to ensure peak performance at all times," Ida added, marching on his other side. "Perhaps you should implement a more structured evening routine. I can lend you my color-coded scheduling charts." "Thanks, Ida-kun. I'll think about it," Izuku replied, his voice flat. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them that his evening routine now consisted of staring at his ceiling and praying he wouldn't have to use his power, that his sleep was plagued by nightmares of their blank, strangers' faces. He couldn't. So he just walked, the silence stretching between them, thick and awkward. He saw the hurt and confusion in their peripheral glances. The wall between them was being built brick by brick, and he was the one laying the mortar. The new regimen began that afternoon. All Might had scheduled them for a private session in Gym Gamma, the site of the original incident. The vast, empty space echoed with a phantom chill for Izuku. Toshinori was there in his skeletal form, a stopwatch in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He wasn't smiling. The usual encouraging warmth was gone, replaced by the grim focus of a surgeon preparing for a difficult operation. "All right, young Midoriya," he began, his voice devoid of its usual bluster. "The goal today is simple. Recalibration. We need to ascertain your baseline. Your true baseline, without one for all. I want you to run the standard heroics obstacle course. But you are forbidden from channeling even a flicker of the quirk. Not even 0.1%. Do you understand?" "Yes, All Might," Izuku said, stretching his legs. The air felt heavy, charged. "Go." Izuku took off. The first few obstacles were manageable. A vault over a low wall, a crawl under a net. But then he reached the leaping platforms, a series of pillars of varying heights that he was supposed to bound across. With even 1% of full cowling, this would have been effortless. He could clear them in a few graceful, spring-loaded jumps. Without it, he was just Izuku Midoriya. A reasonably fit teenage boy, but a boy nonetheless. He took a running start and leaped for the first platform. His fingers scraped the edge, but he couldn't get a purchase. He slid back down, landing with a grunt in the padded mat below. He tried again, pushing off harder. This time he managed to haul himself up, his arms trembling with exertion. He stood, panting, on the first pillar, staring at the next one, which was higher and further away. It was humiliating. It felt like he was moving through molasses. Every movement was a struggle, every meter gained a hard-won victory. The frustration was a hot, coiling thing in his stomach. The power was right there. A sea of it, waiting inside him. He could feel it, a dormant giant. It would be so easy to let just a trickle of it into his legs, to make this simple. Don't even think about it. Toshinori's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and stern. This is your reality now. This is your foundation. Anything else is a bonus. Get used to the struggle. Izuku gritted his teeth and pushed on. He failed. He fell. He got back up, his hero costume scuffed, and his body already aching. He didn't use his mind. He was just trying to brute force it with a body that was no longer superpowered. By the time he finished the course, his time was abysmal, nearly 3 times what it would have been with his quirk. He collapsed onto the mats, his chest heaving. That was pathetic, he gasped, slamming a fist into the ground. No, Toshinori said, walking over to him. He wasn't offering a hand up. That was a necessary data point. You tried to solve a problem with tools you no longer have. You relied on strength and speed that isn't yours. Your real weapons aren't your muscles, my boy. They never were. He tapped his own temple. It's this. Your mind. The thing that filled 13 notebooks with hero analysis before you could even throw a punch. He gestured for Izuku to get up. Again. But this time, don't try to be me. Be you. The real you. The words hit home. He had been so focused on what he'd lost, the effortless power, the speed, the strength, that he'd forgotten what he'd always had. He was a strategist. An analyst. He approached the course again. This time, he didn't run. He walked at first, his eyes scanning every angle, every surface. He noticed things he'd ignored before. A maintenance hook on the side of a wall, a slight imbalance in a swinging obstacle that could be used to his advantage. The specific timing of the automated laser grid. His second run was completely different. He didn't try to leap the platforms. He used a discarded pipe he found on the ground as a makeshift grappling hook, wedging it into a crevice and hauling himself up. He timed his movements through the laser grid with meticulous precision. He used his momentum on the swinging bars to carry him further. It wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. But it was smart. He was thinking like a hero who had to rely on his wits because he had nothing else. He finished the course, still exhausted, but his time was a full minute faster. He stood there, panting, a flicker of something other than despair lighting in his chest. It was the dim, faint spark of his old self. The quirkless boy who dreamed. Better, Toshinori acknowledged, making a note on his clipboard. This is your new training. We will drill your body to its physical peak, but we will sharpen your mind until it is your deadliest weapon. Your notebooks are no longer a hobby, young Midoriya. They are your primary hero agency. They are your arsenal. Izuku nodded, a grim determination solidifying within him. If he couldn't be a symbol of power, he would become a symbol of ingenuity. He would have to. It was the only way forward. The weight of the secret was heaviest not in the lonely confines of the gym, but in the crowded, cheerful spaces of everyday life. The school cafeteria, once a place of easy camaraderie, had become a minefield. He sat at their usual table, pushing food around his plate. Ida was detailing a new study plan for the upcoming midterms, while Uraraka was enthusiastically describing a new ultimate move she was working on. So if I make the debris weightless before I launch it, the initial force required is much less, but the momentum is the same once I release my quirk. I'm calling it Meteor Fafrotsky's, she announced proudly, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Deku-kun, you're so good at analyzing this stuff. Could you watch me train later? I bet you could find a way to make it more efficient. Her request was so innocent, so full of trust in his ability and their friendship. It was a direct appeal to the foundation of their bond, his analytical mind helping her become a better hero. A year ago, he would have started muttering on the spot, pulling out a notebook and firing off a dozen suggestions. Now, her words sent a jolt of pure terror through him. Watch her train. Help her. What if she gets into trouble? What if a piece of debris falls the wrong way? What if I have to use my quirk to save her? The image of her blank, smiling face flashed in his mind. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya-san. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't even be near her when she was training, because his first instinct would always be to protect her, and his protection was now a poison that would erase him from her life. He had to sever that connection. He had to push her away, for her own sake. I can't, he said, his voice coming out colder and sharper than he intended. Uraraka blinked, her smile faltering. Oh. Okay. Are you busy? Yes. He lied, the word feeling like acid on his tongue. He had to make the lie believable. He had to make it sting, so she wouldn't ask again. I need to focus on my own training. My quirk has some issues. I can't afford to be distracted. He didn't look at her, but he could feel the shift in the atmosphere at the table. He could feel her hurt. He could feel Ida's disapproving silence. I see, Uraraka said, her voice small. She deflated, the brilliant light of her enthusiasm dimming. No, that makes sense. You should focus on yourself. I'm sorry for asking. Don't apologize, he wanted to scream. Please hate me instead. It would be easier. Indeed, Ida interjected, his tone stiff. A hero's primary duty is to understand their own capabilities. However, Midoriya-kun, teamwork and mutual support are also vital tenets of the UA curriculum. To dismiss a friend's request so curtly is unbecoming. Ida-kun is right, Izuku said, seizing the opportunity to drive the wedge deeper. He finally looked up, meeting their wounded gazes with a carefully constructed mask of detached arrogance he'd seen on a dozen other heroes. But right now, I'm the one with the biggest handicap. My power breaks me. Until I can fix that, I'm a liability. I can't be a use to anyone else until I'm a use to myself. You should probably find someone else to help you analyze your moves, Uraraka-san. Todoroki-kun is very analytical. He had never used her formal name like that. The san hung in the air between them, a cold, sharp barrier. Her eyes widened, glistening with unshed tears. She looked utterly stricken. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, simply nodding as she stared down at her tray. He had done it. He had protected her by breaking her heart. The katsudon on his plate suddenly looked inedible. He felt sick. Excuse me, he mumbled, standing up abruptly. I'm not hungry. He walked away from the table, feeling their eyes on his back. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The weight of his secret was a crushing physical force, and he felt like if he stopped moving, it would flatten him into the polished linoleum floor. He found refuge in an empty hallway, leaning against the cold wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had to do that. He had to be cruel to be kind. But it didn't feel kind. It felt like he was methodically amputating his own soul, one friendship at a time. A loud, aggressive voice cut through his misery. Oh, Deku! Izuku looked up to see Katsuki Bakugo blocking his path, his hands shoved in his pockets, his red eyes narrowed into slits. His usual explosive rage was there, but it was simmering under a layer of something else, genuine, biting confusion. What the hell is your problem? Bakugo growled, his voice a low rumble. I'm not in the mood, Kaken, Izuku said wearily, trying to step around him. Bakugo blocked him again, stepping in his path. Don't you walk away from me, you damn nerd. I saw you at the cafeteria. You made Roundface cry. And all week, in training, you've been fighting like you're back in middle school. Like a quirkless weakling. He jabbed a finger into Izuku's chest. You finally get a half-decent quirk, you get a little bit of spotlight at the sports festival, and now what? You're chickening out? Did that half-and-half bastard scare you so bad you pissed away all your nerve? The taunts, which normally would have stung, were now a bizarre kind of relief. Bakugo's anger was simple. It was direct. It wasn't the complicated, wounded hurt he'd seen in Uraraka's eyes. It's none of your business, Izuku said, his voice tired. The hell it isn't! Bakugo exploded, his voice rising. I've been waiting my whole goddamn life for you to be a real rival, for you to finally stand in my way with something other than your pathetic, muttering pity case act. You showed a flash of it, a real spark of power, and now you're hiding it away like a coward. Are you mocking me? The irony was staggering. Bakugo, the one person he thought would be thrilled to see him powerless, was furious that he wasn't using his power. Bakugo didn't want a weak Deku to bully. He wanted a strong Deku to crush. He wanted a worthy opponent, and Izuku, in his attempt to protect everyone, was denying him that. I'm not trying to mock you, Kaken, Izuku said, a strange calm settling over him. He met Bakugo's furious gaze without flinching. I'm just doing what I have to do, and what's that? Being useless? Izuku saw an opportunity. Bakugo's anger was a shield. He could use it. He could let Bakugo think he was a coward. That perception would keep him at a distance. It was a different kind of cruelty than the one he'd inflicted on Uraraka, but it was a cruelty nonetheless. Maybe, Izuku said softly. Bakugo stared at him, his mouth agape, momentarily stunned into silence by the quiet admission. He had expected a fight, a denial, a stuttered excuse. He hadn't expected acceptance. You damn nerd! Bakugo finally spat out, his rage now laced with disgust. So that's it? You got one taste of a real fight and you folded. Pathetic. Don't even look at me. You're not worth the effort to blast. He turned and stalked away, his shoulders stiff with contempt. Stay out of my way, Deku. You're just a pebble on the side of the road again. Izuku watched him go, the word Deku echoing in the hallway. Useless. That's what it meant. Maybe Bakugo was right. By sealing away his power, he was making himself useless. But the alternative was so much worse. He pushed himself off the wall and continued his walk to nowhere, the weight of his secret a little heavier, the fortress of solitude around him a little taller. His new training regimen with All Might wasn't just about physical conditioning and quirkless combat. It was about adaptation. If your body can no longer be your primary weapon, you must arm yourself with technology. Tashinori had told him. The support course is not just for gadgets. It is a vital resource for heroes whose quirks have limitations. And your limitation is now the most severe of all. So, Izuku found himself standing before the gigantic, blast-shielded doors of the UA development studio. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and knocked. The door was flung open with explosive force. Come in, potential customer or human test subject, a voice boomed. Mei Hatsum stood there, her pink dreadlocks tied back, her goggles pushed up on her forehead. Her yellow eyes, magnified by her custom lenses, zoomed in on him with unnerving intensity. Grease stained her face and coveralls. Behind her, the workshop was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of half-finished inventions, sparking wires, and blueprints taped to every available surface. Ah! It's you! Sports Festival boy! The one who advertised my babies so well! She exclaimed, grabbing his arm and yanking him inside with surprising strength. What can I do for you? Need an upgrade? I can make your suit 10 times more explosive. Or maybe some rocket boots that have a slightly less than 40% chance of launching you into orbit. I've been working on the math. No, nothing like that, Hatsum-san, Izuku said, trying to keep his balance. I need something different. More practical. He pulled out his new notebook, the Codex, but he had a false cover on it labeled Support Gear Analysis. He opened it to a section of detailed sketches and notes he'd prepared. Hatsum leaned in, her eyes scanning the pages with manic speed. Ooh, what are these cute little babies? Reinforced gauntlets, high-tension wire grappling system, impact-absorbing saws. This isn't flashy. This is functional. She looked up at him, her usual explosive energy momentarily replaced by a look of genuine, analytical curiosity. Your quirk is all about overwhelming power, right? Raw physical force. Why are you focusing on gear that seems designed for someone without a quirk? The question was so direct, so perceptive, it caught him off guard. I can't always rely on my quirk, he managed, sticking to the cover story he and All Might had devised. It causes too much strain on my body. I need to be able to operate at a high level without it, for stealth missions, long-term operations, situations where a massive power display would be counterproductive. It was a plausible lie. Hatsum's grin returned, wider than before. A challenge! You want to be a hero even when you can't use your best tool. You want my babies to be your power. I love it, she shrieked, her enthusiasm causing a nearby invention to short-circuit with a loud bang. This is a fantastic design challenge. It requires subtlety, efficiency, redundancy. She grabbed his notebook and began scribbling her own notes in the margins at a furious pace. Okay, The grappling system is good, but we can make the wire from a carbon nanofiber weave for higher tensile strength and lower weight. The reinforced soles are a must, but let's add electromagnetic clamps for wall scaling. The gauntlets, yes, good for blocking, but what if they also house the compressed air burst for non-lethal crowd control or a small taser charge? Ooh! The possibilities! For the next hour, Izuku was swept up in her whirlwind of creative genius. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of his old self return. He wasn't just a victim of his circumstances, he was actively fighting them. He was building his own solutions. He and Hatsum debated materials, power sources, and deployment mechanisms. His analytical mind, which he'd been forced to turn inward on his own curse, was finally unleashed on a solvable problem. It was a profound relief. He left the workshop with a promise from Hatsum that she'd have prototypes for his new Corkless Combat Suite ready within a week, and a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just the boy with the terrible secret. He was Izuku Midoriya, the hero who was preparing. He was adapting. He was surviving. He walked back to the main building, the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows across the campus. He felt a sliver of hope. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could walk this lonely path. As he rounded a corner, he saw Uraraka and Ida standing with Todoroki near the campus entrance. Uraraka was demonstrating a move, and Todoroki was watching with his typical stoic intensity, occasionally offering a quiet, perceptive comment. They were doing exactly what he had told them to do. They were moving on. They were training together. And he was on the outside, looking in. The small sliver of hope he had felt moments before dissolved, replaced by the familiar, crushing weight of his isolation. He had made his choice. He had pushed them away to protect them, and it was working. He was succeeding at becoming alone. He ducked behind a row of hedges, his heart aching, and waited for them to leave before continuing on his way. The weight of the secret was not just in the knowing. It was in the thousand small choices he had to make every day to uphold it. It was in every averted gaze, every forced lie, every friendship he had to actively dismantle. That night, he sat at his desk in his quiet dorm room. On one side lay the schematics for his new support gear, a testament to his will to adapt. On the other lay the codex, anamnesis, a testament to his curse. He picked up a pen, his hand steady, and began to write, not in the codex, but in his old, familiar hero analysis for the future, number 13. He didn't write about himself. He wrote about his friends. He analyzed Uraraka's new move from memory, sketching out 3 different ways she could improve her aim and reduce the strain on her body. He detailed a potential combination move for Ida and Todoroki, using Ida's speed to spread Todoroki's ice over a wider area for rapid containment. He filled pages with the advice he could never give them, the help he could never offer. His notebooks, once a tool for his own dream, were now becoming a silent testament to the friendships he was forced to sacrifice. He was becoming a different kind of hero. One who fought in the shadows, not with power, but with preparation. But the hero he was building was being forged in the fires of loneliness, and the boy he used to be was turning to ash. The weight was immense, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was only going to get heavier. Hosa's city burned. The air, thick with smoke and the acrid smell of charred plastic, was a chaotic symphony of screams, sirens, and the monstrous, guttural roars of Noma. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Their internships were meant to be controlled learning experiences, a week of shadowing pro-heroes, handling paperwork, and maybe, if they were lucky, participating in a low-level purse-snatching pursuit. Instead, the city had become a war zone. Izuku Midoriya, clad in his hero costume, the same one he wore when he faced Muscular, but feeling a size too big, a hollow shell of the hero he was supposed to be, stood frozen on a rooftop overlooking the chaos. He was on patrol with Gran Torino, the diminutive, jet-propelled hero who had first whipped him into shape. But they'd been separated when the first Nomu attacked, a grotesque creature with wings and a brain exposed to the night air. Gran Torino had zipped off to engage it, shouting at Izuku to stay put, to coordinate with local police, to be a support unit, not a frontline combatant. It was a perfectly logical command. Izuku was an intern, a student. His job was to observe, report, and stay out of the way of the professionals. And for the first time in his life, he was more than willing to obey. The thought of wading into that chaos, of being forced into a situation where he would have to unleash one for all, sent a tremor of pure, visceral fear through him. The memory of his mother's blank smile was a fresh, agonizing wound. He couldn't risk it. He wouldn't. His phone buzzed in a pouch on his belt. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking slightly. It was a mass text from the 1A group chat, a frantic jumble of messages. Yairose, is everyone alright? There are reports of a major villain attack in Hosa City. Kirishima, Todoroki is there. And Ida? Bro, you good? Uraraka, Ida-kun isn't answering his phone. I'm worried, Ida. A cold dread, colder than the fear of his own quirk, washed over Izuku. He remembered the last time he'd seen Ida, his face a grim, unreadable mask of cold fury. He remembered the news report about Ida's older brother, the pro-hero Ingenium, being critically, permanently injured by the hero killer, Stain. And he remembered the chillingly simple message Ida had sent him when Izuku had tried to reach out, I'm fine. It was a lie. A terrible, obvious lie. Ida wasn't fine. He was grieving. He was enraged. And he had chosen to do his internship in Hosa City, the last known location of the man who had crippled his brother. He wasn't here to learn. He was here for revenge. No! Izuku whispered to the smoky air. Ida, you idiot! He pulled up a map on his phone, his mind racing, connecting the dots with the frantic speed of a master strategist. The Nomu attack was a distraction. It was too loud, too chaotic, too public for a methodical predator like Stain. The hero killer preferred the shadows, the quiet alleyways where he could ambush his prey. While the city's heroes were focused on the monsters, the real demon would be hunting in the dark. He scanned the map, cross-referencing the Nomu attack sites with the location where Ingenium was found. There was a network of narrow, grimy alleyways in the 4th district, a perfect hunting ground. It was a long shot, a wild guess based on nothing but a terrible, sinking feeling in his gut. He had to find him, but the rooftop he was on was isolated. The street below was swarming with panicked civilians and overwhelmed police officers. He needed to move, and he needed to move fast. He looked at his hands. The power was there, dormant. A 5% full calling leap could clear half the district in minutes. It would be so easy. So efficient. No. The word was an iron wall in his mind. He couldn't. The risk was too great. What if 5% wasn't the safe zone he thought it was? What if the threshold was lower? What if the memory damage was cumulative, 1,000 tiny paper cuts to the soul? He grit his teeth. He had to be a hero without it. He had to rely on the new regimen. He scrambled to the edge of the roof and peered down. It was a 4-story drop. He spotted a fire escape on the adjacent building. With a running start, he leaped. It wasn't a graceful, superpowered bound. It was a desperate, clumsy jump. His fingers hooked onto the rusty railing of the fire escape with a painful jolt that shot up his arm. He grunted, hauling himself over the side, his muscles screaming in protest. He clambered down the metal stairs, his boots clanging loudly, and dropped the last 10 feet to the ground, rolling to absorb the impact. He was on his feet in an instant, pushing his way through the terrified crowd, his eyes scanning the alley entrances. He was just a boy in a costume, quirkless and afraid, but he was moving. He was trying. He ran. His lungs burned, and his legs ached, but he pushed himself harder, his mind locked on his friend's face. Not the blank face of a stranger, but the proud, rigid, secretly vulnerable face of Tenya Ida. He ducked into the first alley in the 4th district. It was empty, smelling of garbage and despair. He ran through to the next street and tried another. Nothing. He was wasting time. Every second that passed, Ida could be. Then he heard it. Not a scream, but a grunt of pain, followed by the distinctive, chilling sound of metal scraping against metal. It was coming from a long, narrow alleyway further down. Without a second's hesitation, Izuku sprinted towards the sound. He skidded around the corner into the mouth of the alley, and his blood ran cold. The scene was a tableau from a nightmare. The pro-hero native was slumped against a brick wall, bleeding from a dozen wounds, clearly paralyzed. And standing over him was the hero killer, Stain. He was even more terrifying in person than on the news reports. A tattered red scarf coiled around his neck like a serpent, his body a wiry mass of muscle crisscrossed with belts and blades. A long, serrated katana was in his hand, dripping with blood. His mask was a horrifying parody of a face, and his eyes burned with a fanatical, righteous fire. But it wasn't Stain that made Izuku's heart stop. It was the figure lying on the ground a few feet away, his silver armor scraped and dented. Tenya Ida? Ida was alive, but he was down. A small, wicked-looking knife was embedded in his shoulder, and a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. He was struggling to push himself up, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage and pain. You fake! Ida spat, his voice trembling. You use the name of a hero, but you are nothing but a murderer. You will pay for what you did to my brother! Stain let out a low, guttural chuckle. It was a horrible, grating sound. He turned his attention from native to Ida, wiping his bloody katana on his scarf. Your brother was a fraud. He, like so many others in this sick society, was a hero for fame and fortune, not for justice. He was weak. And so are you. He took a step towards Ida, raising his sword. You tracked me down not for justice, but for personal vengeance. Your eyes are not the eyes of a true hero. They are the eyes of a selfish child, and for that, you must be purged. The sword began its descent. Time stopped. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. There was no one else here. No pros were coming. The city was burning. Ida was going to die, right here, in this filthy alley, for a foolish, noble, understandable quest for revenge. The panic button was flashing red in his mind. Use it. Use the power. Save him. No! A different part of his brain screamed back. You can't. Think of the consequences. He'll forget you. And a third, colder voice whispered, Isn't it better for him to forget you than to be dead? The cold voice won. But he had to be smart. He had to be calculated. He had to minimize the damage, both to himself and to reality. He couldn't afford a massive, 8% smash. He needed speed. He needed precision. He needed full cowling. He sent a quick, frantic text, his thumbs flying across the screen of his phone. It was a single message, sent to the one person who would understand its coded meaning. To All Might. Message, have to do it. Hosu. Ida. He didn't wait for a reply. He jammed the phone back in his pouch, took a half-second to center himself, and let the river of one for all flood his veins. Not 1%. Not 8. He settled on the razor's edge he'd been so afraid of. 5%. The number felt both terrifying and inadequate. It had been safe once. He prayed to every god he could think of that it would be safe again. An emerald aura exploded around him, crackling with green lightning. The world snapped into sharp, brilliant focus. The sluggish, clumsy body he'd been trapped in was gone, replaced by a vessel of barely contained energy. He launched himself forward. The 40 feet separating him from the confrontation vanished in less than a second. He didn't shout a battle cry. He didn't announce his presence. He was a silent, green blur of motion. Stain's eyes widened a fraction of a second before impact, the only sign that he'd registered the new threat. He was fast, preternaturally so, but Izuku, powered by One for All, was faster. Izuku didn't aim for Stain. He aimed for the sword. He brought his right arm around in a sweeping arc, his reinforced glove meeting the flat of the blade with a deafening clang. The force of the blow was immense, far more than a normal human could generate. The katana was ripped from Stain's grasp, spinning through the air and embedding itself deep in the opposite brick wall with a vicious thunk. At the same time, Izuku's left fist shot out, not with bone-shattering force, but with a precise, controlled jab aimed directly at Stain's jaw. It was a stunning blow, designed to disorient, not incapacitate. The hero killer stumbled back, his head snapping to the side. It was the opening Izuku needed. He grabbed Ida by the collar of his armor and hauled him backwards, dragging him away from the immediate danger zone. Midoriya? Ida gasped, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and shame. What are you doing here? This is my fight. It has nothing to do with you. Everything a friend does has to do with me. Izuku shot back, his voice tight with adrenaline as he kept his body between Ida and Stain. A real hero doesn't let their friends fight their demons alone. Stain had already recovered, shaking his head to clear it. He looked at Izuku, his burning eyes taking in the crackling green energy, the determined set of his jaw. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. Another one. Stain rasped, pulling another, smaller knife from his belt. Another false hero, drawn to the flame. But you are different. Your eyes, they have the fire of the All Might era, the spark of self-sacrifice. He licked his lips, a grotesque, reptilian gesture. You might just be worthy. Before Izuku could react, something streaked past his head. A massive wave of fire erupted in the alley, forcing Stain to leap back to avoid being roasted, one after another. A calm, familiar voice stated from the alley entrance. You people are a real handful. Shoto Todoroki stood there, his left side wreathed in brilliant orange flames, his right hand coated in a layer of frost. His expression was as cool and collected as ever, but his eyes were fixed on Ida, a silent message of support passing between them. Todoroki-kun! Izuku exclaimed, a wave of relief so potent it almost made his knees buckle. He wasn't alone. I got your location share, Midoriya, Todoroki said, his gaze shifting to Izuku. I figured you'd do something reckless. Seems I was right. This doesn't concern you too, Ida yelled, struggling against Izuku's grip. This is my burden. My vengeance. Then we'll just have to share the burden, Todoroki said, his voice flat but firm. He sent another jet of flame towards Stain, who dodged it with inhuman agility, bounding off the walls like a pinball. The fight began in earnest. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle. Stain was a whirlwind of blades and brutal efficiency. He was faster than any of them, his movements economical and deadly. He wasn't trying to land a knockout blow, he was trying to draw blood. He knew his quirk, Blood Curdle, was his ultimate trump card. One taste of their blood, and they would be paralyzed, helpless. Izuku, Todoroki, and a still partially immobile Ida fought back. It was a messy, uncoordinated battle. Todoroki would try to box Stain in with walls of ice, but the hero killer was too agile, using the frozen structures as springboards. Ida, his legs slowly regaining function, would attempt a reciprocal kick, but his movements were telegraphed, fueled by rage rather than strategy. Izuku was the linchpin. He danced around the battlefield, a green comet of controlled power. He used his 5% full cowling not for offense, but for defense and support. He would appear in a flash to knock a thrown knife out of the air before it could hit Todoroki. He would use his speed to bodily shove Ida out of the way of one of Stain's lunges. He was the guardian, the fast-moving shield protecting his two friends. Every second that passed was an agony of a different sort. The 5% was a constant, low-grade hum of power. It felt safe. There was no metaphysical shift, no sense of reality being unplugged. But he couldn't be sure. The fear was a constant companion, a whisper in the back of his mind. Is it happening now? Have they forgotten me yet? He pushed the thought away, focusing on the immediate threat. Stain was a master of exploiting weaknesses. He saw Ida's rage, Todoroki's reliance on his large-scale attacks, and Izuku's defensive posture. He feinted towards Todoroki, drawing a massive wave of ice, then used the visual cover to throw a small, wickedly sharp blade directly at Ida's exposed arm. There was no time to block it. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. He shoved Ida hard, putting himself in the knife's path. The blade sliced through the fabric of his suit, and deep into his calf muscle. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up his leg. He cried out, stumbling, his control over full cowling flickering for a dangerous second. Stain was on him in an instant, his terrifying face inches from Izuku's. Got you! He hissed. He brought the bloody knife to his mouth and licked the edge. Immediately Izuku's world went numb. The crackling green energy of One for All vanished. His limbs became unresponsive, turning to lead. He collapsed to the grimy pavement, his body completely paralyzed, able to do nothing but watch as Stain loomed over him. Midoriya! Todoroki yelled, unleashing a torrent of fire and ice simultaneously, A move of desperate, raw power. Stain dodged back, but the sheer scale of the attack forced him to retreat further down the alley. See? Stain cackled, his voice echoing in the narrow space. This is what I mean. The moment one of you is in true danger, you reveal your true selves. One becomes a martyr, the other unleashes his power without regard for his surroundings. Only one person here is worthy of the name hero. His wild eyes settled on Izuku. It's him, the one who bled for another without hesitation. All Might himself would have done the same. He turned his back on them, focusing on the still paralyzed pro-hero native. I'll kill the rest of you later. But these fakes, they must be purged now. He raised his sword, ready to finish his work. But Ida was moving again. His paralysis had worn off. With a roar of pure, unadulterated fury, his engines flared to life. Recipro-extend! He screamed, launching himself forward, his foot aimed like a spear at Stain's back. It was a powerful, desperate attack. But it was born of rage, and Stain was a master of turning rage against his opponents. He sidestepped at the last possible second. Ida's kick sailed past him and slammed into the brick wall, shattering the concrete. The hero killer brought the hilt of his sword down hard on the back of Ida's neck. Ida crumpled to the ground, unconscious. 2 down! Stain rasped. Todoroki was now alone, facing the most dangerous opponent he had ever encountered. He was panting, his left side steaming, his right side covered in a layer of frost from the overuse of his quirk. Izuku lay on the ground, helpless, screaming at his own body to move. Get up! Get up! Help them! But his muscles wouldn't obey. He was trapped inside his own skull, a spectator to the impending tragedy. Stain began to advance on Todoroki, his movements slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. Your fire is impressive, he said. But it is untamed. Your ice is powerful, but it is brittle. You rely on your heritage, not your heart. You are the epitome of a false hero. Todoroki grit his teeth, preparing for a final, desperate stand. And then, something in Izuku's mind snapped. The carefully constructed walls of his new protocol, the fear of his own power, the dread of being forgotten, it all came crashing down in the face of the immediate, undeniable reality. His friends were going to die. He had held back. He had used the safe 5%, and it had failed. It wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed overwhelming, decisive, reality-breaking power. The consequences be damned. A new kind of energy surged through him. It wasn't the controlled flow of full calling. It was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated will. It ripped through the paralysis of Stain's quirk as if it were nothing. The power of one for all, responding to the absolute, desperate need of its wielder, roared to life. He didn't just activate it. He unleashed it. The ground beneath him cracked. An explosion of emerald light and bioelectricity erupted from his body, so intense it lit up the entire alley like a bolt of green lightning. He shot to his feet, the gash in his leg forgotten. Get away from them! He roared, his voice amplified by the raw power coursing through him. He pushed past the 5% barrier. 8%. 10%. The power was a glorious, agonizing fire, searing his muscles, but he welcomed the pain. He focused it all into his right arm, the limb already scarred from 100 past battles. Stain and Todoroki both stared at him, stunned by the sheer, overwhelming pressure radiating from him. It was a pressure they had only ever felt from one other person, All Might. So, you finally show your true colors, Stain whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and bloodlust. Izuku didn't answer. He just moved. He pushed off the ground, shattering the pavement, and shot forward in a streak of green. He wasn't just fast anymore. He was a force of nature. He drove his fist forward in a devastatingly powerful, straight punch. A Detroit smash. Not at 100%, which would have leveled the city block, but at a concentrated, brutal 20%. Stain tried to block, tried to dodge, but there was no escaping it. The punch connected with his chest. It wasn't just a physical impact, it was a concussive blast. The air in the alley compressed and detonated. Stain was launched backwards as if he'd been hit by a freight train, slamming into the far wall with enough force to shatter brick and mortar. He slumped to the ground, his blades clattering around him, and didn't move. The alley fell silent. The only sounds were Todoroki's ragged breathing and the faint, electrical crackle of the dissipating energy around Izuku. Izuku stood there, his right arm throbbing, a dull, aching precursor to the agony that was to come. But it wasn't broken. His training, his control, it had held. He had done it. He had saved them. He turned to Todoroki, a tired, relieved smile touching his lips. And then he saw it, Todoroki's face. It was blank. The fierce concentration, the comradely concern, it was all gone. Replaced by a cool, detached, analytical expression. He was looking at Izuku not as a friend, but as a power source. A phenomenon to be studied. That output, Todoroki said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. It was comparable to All Might's in his prime. Your quirk is more versatile than I initially calculated. An impressive asset. Izuku's blood ran cold. The smile vanished from his face. It was happening again. The world was unplugged. He glanced over at Ida, who was beginning to stir. He pushed himself up, groaning, and his eyes fell on Izuku. There was no recognition. Only confusion. Who? Ida started, his voice groggy. He looked at the scene, the downed pro-hero, the unconscious hero killer, the trail of destruction. What happened? Who are you? The words were hammer blows to Izuku's already fragile soul. He had saved them. He had done the heroic thing. And his reward was to be erased. He felt the power of one for all still thrumming under his skin. He had to deactivate it. He had to let their memories return. He reached inward to sever the connection, to let the roaring river of power subside. But as he did, he felt a resistance. It was like trying to close a floodgate against a tsunami. The power, unleashed with such desperate intent, didn't want to be contained again, and he felt a terrifying new sensation. The longer he held it, the more permanent the metaphysical shift felt. The world wasn't just unplugged, the wires were starting to fray. With a gasping cry of exertion, he forced it down. He wrestled the giant back into its cage, the muscles in his entire body screaming in protest. The emerald aura flickered, sputtered, and finally died. The world snapped back into focus. The change was instantaneous and violent. Todoroki gasped, stumbling back a step, his hand flying to his head as if struck. Midoriya, he breathed, his voice suddenly filled with a flood of awe and terror. Your arm. Ida's eyes, which had been blank and confused, widened in horror and dawning recognition. Midoriya-kun, he whispered, shame and gratitude warring on his face. You saved us. I was so lost. The memories were back. But they felt different. Thinner. Todoroki looked at him, and the easy camaraderie they had been building since the sports festival felt strained. There was a new distance in his eyes, a layer of awe that bordered on fear. It was as if he was looking at a human being one moment, and a living weapon the next. The memory was there. Midoriya is my friend, but the emotional resonance felt hazy, like a story he had been told rather than an experience he had lived. He remembered the feeling of friendship, but he couldn't quite feel it anymore. Ida's gratitude was immense, but it was formal, respectful. The desperate, emotional connection of a friend saving a friend was replaced by the profound debt one hero owes another. He saw Izuku not as his classmate who sat behind him in class, but as a savior, a symbol. It was a pedestal, and it was just as isolating as a cage. The emotional bonds hadn't been completely shattered, but they had been chipped. They were now hairline fractures in the foundation of their friendship. Izuku could feel it. He could see it in the way they looked at him, the slight hesitation in their movements, the new formality in their tone. Just then, a swarm of pro-heroes, led by a winded Gran Torino and a grim-faced Endeavor, flooded the alley. They took in the scene, the defeated hero killer, the injured students, the sheer destruction, with stunned silence. What in the blazes happened here? Gran Torino demanded, zipping over to Izuku and inspecting his bleeding leg. It was Stain, Todoroki said, his voice still a little shaky. He attacked us. Midoriya stopped him, Endeavor grunted, his fiery gaze sweeping over the scene. He looked at Izuku, his eyes lingering on the boy's throbbing arm, a flicker of something unreadable. Respect? Calculation? In their depths. Izuku didn't say anything. He just stood there, his body aching, his heart feeling like a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had paid the price. He had stained his own existence to be a hero. He had saved his friends, but he had lost a piece of them in the process. He had pushed them one step further away, not with cruelty this time, but with heroism. He looked at Todoroki's distant, respectful gaze and Ida's formal, indebted expression, and a terrible, lonely thought echoed in the silence of his soul. The stronger I get, the further away they become. And he knew, with a certainty that was as absolute as the coming dawn, that this was only the beginning.